Hello and welcome to the Monday, December 9th, 2019 edition of Tesla Daily, unofficial Tesla podcast. My name is Rob Maurer. Today we're talking about Tesla's update to premium connectivity, an autopilot crash, some news on Gigafactory Shanghai, and China in general, and a few other stories as well. Tesla stock on the day today did finish up 1.1% to $339.53. That compared to the NASDAQ down 0.4%. The macro environment kind of fell off towards the end of the day, and that did drag Tesla down a little bit from the earlier highs of the day. But I think the rise today was probably driven by the news that we got at the tail end of last week, with Elon's trial wrapping up, and then also what seems to be developing news from Gigafactory Shanghai. Remember, we talked a lot about the possibility of Tesla having received sales approval for China, and Elon didn't necessarily confirm this, but did acknowledge it in a tweet in reply to Vincent, who had said, "Congrats, Elon, on the case, also the China sale permit." And Elon said, quote, "Huge admiration and respect for the Tesla China team. Their talent and drive is amazing," end quote. So if Tesla had not yet been granted sales approval, that would be sort of a weird tweet to pick out and respond to. So combining that with all the evidence that we had on Friday, it certainly seems like that sales approval has been granted. It was also nice to see the stock up today despite the reports of an autopilot crash. This happened over the weekend in Connecticut, and I don't believe there were any serious injuries, thankfully, but it was with a police car, and the driver of the Model 3 claimed that he was checking on his dog in the back seat while autopilot was on, and then this accident happened. So there's been some speculation out there online that maybe when he was doing that, checking in the back, he may have accidentally disabled autopilot. That is speculation. We don't have any official reports. That does seem plausible to me. But either way, it's nice to see the stock not have much of a reaction, if any reaction, to this news. There are going to be a lot of autopilot crashes in the future. There's going to be a lot of full self-driving crashes in the future. Not every one of those is a newsworthy event. And even those that are newsworthy are probably pretty immaterial to the long-term fundamentals of the business, in which case the stock really shouldn't react to that news. So with this, I'm hopeful that we may be somewhat approaching that. Though this accident wasn't necessarily drama-free, with Senator Ed Markey, Democrat from Massachusetts, saying, quote, "Autopilot clearly can't be allowed to replace drivers on our roads. This tech will continue causing harm until Tesla takes action to fix its flawed system and make sure drivers are paying attention. That's why I sent a letter demanding Tesla take action to protect the public," end quote. So Markey is the senator that a few weeks ago happened to see some of the YouTube videos of people seemingly sleeping while on autopilot. So he decided to reach out to Tesla and ask them to disable autopilot as a system until they can resolve that. First of all, most of those videos, if not all of those videos, are fake. Second of all, we have the safety statistics, and we know that vehicles that have autopilot hardware and software and active safety features are more safe than vehicles that do not have those things. So whether autopilot functionality makes them more or less safe is up for debate, but the combination of active safety features plus autopilot is better than vehicles without. We've had this conversation before, but to completely argue against autopilot is to argue against those things, at least on some level. And then third, people are always going to find a way to use things irresponsibly. If somebody takes a baseball and throws a baseball through somebody's window, it's not the baseball manufacturer's responsibility to make sure that that can never happen again. Now, if everyone all of a sudden started taking baseballs and everyone started breaking everyone's windows, then yeah, maybe the government should get involved, put some regulations on that. Thankfully, math exists, and we can use math to make better decisions than outlawing all baseballs. All right, next topic, premium connectivity. Tesla over the weekend sent out some emails letting people know that the premium connectivity trials were coming to an end at the end of the year. So premium connectivity is not a new idea. This has always been in the plans, but I think a lot of people had forgotten about that since it has been a while since we've heard about it. But this will separate a couple features out from standard connectivity, and then it will also isolate a few more features to be Wi-Fi only on standard connectivity. So if you want to use cellular data, that's where the premium connectivity comes in. The two features that are completely separated out from standard connectivity are live traffic visualization and satellite view maps, and then the additional handful of features that will require premium connectivity to use with a cellular network are video streaming, karaoke, music streaming, and internet browser. So those things on cellular plus the live traffic visualization and satellite view maps, all for $9.99 per month. While I know it's not super exciting to start paying a monthly premium, there is still some excitement here, and that is that video streaming will be enabled over cellular with this premium connectivity package. That was not a certainty when we first learned about video streaming. So it's nice to see that. And then the $999 pricing is actually extremely reasonable from Tesla. Looking at other automakers' data plans, we have GM offering unlimited data for $25 per month, BMW, Audi, Porsche, $20 a month, Volkswagen, $18 a month. So Tesla is undercutting these prices by basically half, with obviously a much more robust ability to actually use that data on the center screen. The one positive those other automakers' plans seem to have is hotspotting, which I don't see anything here about for Tesla. Still, I think a much better value proposition. If we look at the financial impact here to Tesla, it's not huge, but it's also not nothing. If we look at a scenario, say a year from now or so, when Tesla's got maybe 1 million vehicles out there that can take advantage of this sort of connectivity, and let's say half of them opt for the premium connectivity, that would be $5 million in revenue per month. So $60 million per year. That'll be less than 0.25% of Tesla's revenue. So pretty small from that perspective, maybe a bit better in terms of profit potential. It's tough to say though, because Tesla is offering this at such a lower rate than competition. Even if we assume that competition's making, 65% margin on those data plans, if Tesla has the same costs, that would leave them with a 30% margin. And even that, I think, seems a little bit optimistic because Tesla's costs presumably would be higher because I think their usage per vehicle will be higher, given the robustness that we talked about. So I don't expect any huge margins here, even if we just assume 30% though. That would be maybe $20 million per year in profit, which would then go straight to the bottom line, ending up being about 11 cents earnings per share for the entire year. That's again assuming, 50% take rate for 1 million vehicles at a 30% margin. So, 2 to 3 cents in earnings per share each quarter. So nothing too crazy. In the short term, it might have a little bit more of an impact because Tesla has been eating the entirety of these costs. Now they'll start recovering some of that revenue. So you're quickly switching from something that's only adding cost to something that's actually adding profit, which should help a little bit in Q1 and Q2. Nothing too material, but again, every little bit helps. All right, next up, let's talk a little bit about Gigafactory Shanghai and China's electric vehicle policies in general. I've been spending way too much time today tracking down and Google translating these Ministry of Industry and Information Technology new energy vehicle proposal drafts to try to get a better understanding of how China plans to grow electric vehicles over these next couple of decades. And I would say I was only marginally successful in those efforts, but definitely still learned a lot, which I'll try to communicate as much as I can of today. So first, just rounding up sort of the rumor mill on Gigafactory Shanghai right now. There's a lot of things going around. I think a lot of it is tough to verify. But what we do know is that there are a lot of Model 3s sitting outside Gigafactory Shanghai. There's a picture on Twitter that's circulating, and it shows literally 500 Model 3s sitting in the parking lot of Gigafactory Shanghai. At a minimum, we know that. We also know that a few days ago, some of those Model 3s were spotted leaving on a trailer from Gigafactory Shanghai. I would caution that that does not necessarily mean anything because those could be going to stores. But those two things we know for sure. Shifting more into the rumor mill, Vincent on Twitter is saying that multiple of his sources have said that weekly production is hitting 1,000 per week in Gigafactory Shanghai. Now, I would urge caution on this, even aside from the normal caveats of, he's got multiple sources, but I don't. This is really coming from one source directly to me. It's coming, third or fourth hand at this point. But then in addition to all of that stuff, communication of production rates, weekly production rates from Tesla in the past has led to extremely poor forecasting. We went heavily through this back around the time that Model 3 was ramping up. Longtime listeners will remember that well, I think. For our newer listeners, Tesla often communicated weekly production rates at the end of the quarter. People would extrapolate that into the next quarter, and then somehow Tesla would end up averaging for the next quarter less than that week end production rate. So a good example of this is Q3 2017. Model 3 was just starting to ramp up, and Tesla said in the earnings report that many of the systems and subsystems had demonstrated capability of 1,000 vehicles per week for the Model 3, and that many others had demonstrated capability of 500 per week for Model 3. Even at the low end at 500 per week, that would mean that, okay, maybe Q4 is looking like something like 6,000 in production or so. But then when Tesla finally reported production for Q4, total Model 3 production was 2,425 vehicles. So then in that Q4 production report on January 3rd, 2018, Tesla said, quote, "During Q4, we made major progress addressing Model 3 production bottlenecks, with our production rate increasing significantly towards the end of the quarter. In the last 7 working days of the quarter, we made 793 Model 3s, and in the last few days, we hit a production rate on each of our manufacturing lines that extrapolates to over 1,000 Model 3s per week." End quote. So that last week they made 793. If you just assume no further progress in Q1, and you say, okay, 12 production weeks in the quarter, that would be 9,500 vehicles in Q1. If you go on the latter half of their guidance saying that they've demonstrated capability for 1,000 per week, that would be, 12,000 in Q1, again, with no further progress. The actual number that Tesla produced in Q1 of 2018 was 9,700. So an average production rate barely above what they ended the last quarter at. And if you use 13 production weeks, then they were actually below. So I'm not bringing this up to knock Tesla for their performance during the Model 3 ramp up, and I'm not bringing this up to compare it necessarily to how Gigafactory Shanghai will ramp up. Obviously, the circumstances are very, very different for Gigafactory Shanghai. The reason that I bring it up is because sometimes, especially internally, people could talk about production rates on a weekly basis, but maybe they are talking about their specific piece of production. Maybe they've demonstrated that capability for 1,000 per week, and maybe that actually hasn't been done for the course of an entire week. Maybe that's an extrapolation from what they were able to get done in one shift, either on their specific piece of the production process, or even if it is referring to final vehicles, it doesn't necessarily mean that that output is sustainable for all the weeks throughout a quarter, while Tesla also still tries to ramp up the production rate. So just a few reasons there that I would urge caution if you're trying to use those numbers for any sort of forecasting at this point. Now, Gigafactory Shanghai is going to ramp quickly. It's going to be much, much quicker than the original Model 3 ramp because they've learned so much since then, and they're doing a lot of this for the second time versus doing it for the first time. We can already see the results of that from the number of vehicles that are sitting in the parking lot. So I think either way, this is going to be a positive surprise to the markets. I just wanted to provide my thoughts and hopefully some extra context around some of these rumors that are floating around and will probably continue to float around here for the next few months. All right, next I just want to spend a couple of minutes looking at China's new energy vehicle policies. As I've mentioned a couple of times now, the Ministry of Industry and Information Technology in China last week posted a draft with some updated thoughts on their new energy vehicle policy. The revision that got the most attention was the increase of their target for new energy vehicles in 2025 up to 25% from the previous target back in 2017 of 20%. So what originally started me down trying to find this source material was that I'd seen a lot of talk about new energy vehicles, and I wasn't exactly sure what that meant. And I also wasn't sure if the 25% was larger because it included more types of vehicles or sort of what the deal here was. I was partially successful in figuring out some of that. So in this draft, in the translation from Google Translate, which I was surprised by the efficacy of that, but the Ministry of Industry and Information Technology describes sort of these 3 vertical pillars of their new energy vehicle platform and then 3 horizontals that sort of arc across those vertical pillars. So the 3 vertical pillars they describe are pure electric vehicles, plug-in hybrids, interestingly, and fuel cell vehicles, so hydrogen fuel cells. All of these are classified as new energy vehicles, though I don't know the exact requirements for a plug-in hybrid to meet that standard. So then within that, the 3 horizontals are battery/battery management software, drive and power electronics, and then network/intelligent technology. So these are sort of the main themes. These 6 areas are the main themes throughout all of the discussion here in these drafts. I would then also add charging, which is often discussed, but perhaps that falls under network. So then in terms of how China plans to incentivize these things, this is really what I wanted to learn more about, and unfortunately I didn't quite learn as much as I would have liked to. But China uses, among other methods, something they call a points method, under which production or importation of new energy vehicles generates positive points, and production or importation of internal combustion engine vehicles generates negative points. There's then a threshold that increases over time that automakers must meet to be able to sell vehicles. So for 2019, that threshold is 10%. for 2020 increases to 12%, then 14%, then 16%, and then 18% in 2023. So this seems to mostly be reported as just straight up percent of the fleet needs to be that percentage of new energy vehicles, but my understanding is that that's not actually the case. That is the percentage of credits for new energy vehicles that is required. From what I can tell, a new energy vehicle can earn anywhere between 2 and either 5 or 6 credits. I've seen different information in different places on the cap there, but the exact amount of credits is determined based on a pretty complex formula incorporating what type of new energy vehicle it is, and then things like weight, efficiency, range, etc. Let's just pretend for an example that we are an automaker and the new energy vehicle that we ship earns 5 credits. Let's say in 2020, we're going to ship 100,000 vehicles. So per this policy, we need to offset that with 12,000 credits or 12%. If we're earning 5 credits per new energy vehicle that we're shipping, that would mean we need to deliver 2,400 of those vehicles to hit that 12,000 credit mark and be at 12%. This explains the difference between the 10% requirement for 2019 and the actual number of electric vehicles that were delivered in China, which is about 4.5% of new vehicles so far year to date in China. So 4.5%, but meeting that 10% credit threshold, I believe. I don't know if they're actually meeting it, but the discrepancy is big enough that certainly there's a difference here. And that difference is too big to be explained by plug-in hybrids. That's maybe 1%, probably even less of sales. So the question this leads me to then is everybody just misreporting on China's targets here around that 25% number for 2025? Assuming I'm understanding this correctly, if we look at, again, sort of how those credit requirements build up, 2021 was 14%, 2022 was 16%, 2023, 18%. So presumably in 2024, that would have been 20%. And then I guess 2025 would have been 22%. But that's for the credits, not for actual percent of vehicles sold. So I'm wondering if maybe this 25% number that keeps getting mentioned, if that's the credit requirement versus actual vehicle sales requirement. This is definitely something I plan to keep exploring and learning more about because this is important. These percentages may change, and then I think what is very likely to change based on the action that we've seen the last couple of years from China is I think the formulas for calculating how those credits are earned is likely to change as well. So over time, even if those percentages are only growing slowly, it may be more and more difficult to actually earn those credits. The other interesting thing here about those credits is that they can roll over. So if an automaker has extra credits in 2019, all of those extra credits can roll over to 2020. And then from that point forward, any extra credits roll over at 50%. Those can then be carried over year for no more than 3 years. These credits are where this conversation may become even more relevant to Tesla other than just electric vehicle adoption, because these credits can be traded. So this is a very similar setup to ZEV credits. And obviously we've seen the value of Tesla trading those go down over time. But in China, I wouldn't be terribly surprised to see them be more aggressive, thus causing the value of these credits to be more significant. I feel like they're almost going to have to be because Tesla's going to be generating a lot of these credits. It's possible that that could play a big role in China deciding to increase these credit requirements. The other major policy here for China in terms of emissions requirements is a corporate average fuel consumption requirement. So this would basically be aggregate fuel efficiency across the entire corporate fleet. Now, I spent all my time today on these new emission vehicle credit things, so still a lot to learn on the other side of the policy with the corporate average fuel consumption requirement. But one interesting note is that those new energy vehicle credits can be used to offset a shortfall in the corporate average fuel consumption requirement. That's another factor that could boost the value of those new energy vehicle credits for Tesla or other automakers. So obviously a pretty complex policy, but I wanted to try to lay some of that groundwork here so that we can all have a better understanding on this going forward. This is going to be extremely important for all automakers for the next, decade or so. If I got anything wrong on this, or if you have anything to add, please let me know. The last thing I want to do is distribute misinformation. And with some of this knowledge coming from translation, it makes that confidence level a little bit more challenging. That's kind of it on the specific policy stuff, but there were a few highlights in these drafts that I did want to mention. Really just some important themes that were discussed throughout these proposals. One concept that was heavily emphasized was openness. So in a translated quote, the MIIT said, quote, "Cross-industry integration and innovation and more open and inclusive international cooperation have become the characteristics of the era of development of the new energy automobile industry, which has greatly enhanced the momentum of industrial development and stimulated market vitality to promote the development of a new industrial development pattern." End quote. This is obviously what we have seen play out with China welcoming Tesla into the country. This concept of international openness was mentioned multiple times, clearly something that China is actively thinking about when it comes to new energy vehicles. There was also a lot of discussion on intelligent mobility and connected cars and autonomy. As I said, one of those three horizontals that they mentioned as sort of their guiding focuses was network and intelligent technology. This should be no major surprise, but for anyone that doesn't have hopes of Tesla's autopilot and full self-driving creating value in China, I think this should give some optimism to the potential for that. I think China will be very supportive in Tesla's endeavors there. There was also a big focus on vehicle-to-grid technology. So part of the draft said, quote, "Strengthen the energy interaction between new energy vehicles and the power grid, or vehicle-to-grid. Strengthen technical research on high cycle life power batteries, promote the application of low-power DC technology, and build flexible power distribution networks." End quote. They also specifically mentioned new energy vehicles' interaction with grid energy being efficient to reduce the cost of new energy vehicles. So that's interesting. And then they also highlighted their desire for vehicle-to-grid technology to, quote, "improve the response capabilities of power grid peak regulation, frequency regulation, and safety emergency response." End quote. The last major thing that stuck out to me here was an entire section dedicated to, quote, "strengthening intellectual property protection," end quote, where they call for, quote, "in-depth implementation of the National Intellectual Property Strategy," end quote, and also seek to, quote, "encourage researchers to develop high-value core intellectual property achievements in the field of new energy vehicles," end quote, and call for, quote, "strict enforcement of intellectual property protection," and a, quote, "system to increase law enforcement and crack down on infringement," end quote. So I know a lot of people are concerned with IP theft for Tesla in China. Obviously, these are just words on paper, but at least they are there. All right, that finally wraps up the China policy conversation. I just have a few other stories here that I'm going to fire through real quick. The European Commission has approved up to $3.2 billion of support for, quote, "research and innovation in the common European priority area of batteries," end quote, to 17 different companies, unfortunately none of which are Tesla. I think BMW is the only one on this list. Next is a quick update from Elon on Twitter on the ATV production timeline. He responded to someone asking about it, saying, quote, "We'll aim to have it come out same time as truck. Two-seater electric ATV designed to work with Cybertruck will be fun," end quote. He then also added that electric dirt bikes would be cool too. Personally, I would love to see an outboard motor and battery combination for boats. Next is that Elon was seen out and about over the weekend in the Cybertruck with Grimes going to a restaurant and then cruising down the highway a little bit. And then also in what is now becoming classic Cybertruck form, to have something go a little bit wrong, Elon ended up hitting a little valet sign thing on his way out of the restaurant, turning left at what was actually a red light, which is relatively common in LA to do. Though to me, this one still looks like a bit of a stretch. So that video is, of course, out there generating more press for Cybertruck. I think even TMZ picked it up. The next quick thing is that UBS has suspended coverage on Tesla. Colin Langan is their analyst. They've been bearish on Tesla for a long time, so I'm not super sad to see them go. And then the last thing today, which is not a laughing matter, I apologize, it's just been a long night, but VW has reached a plea deal in Canada in respect to Dieselgate that they're going to put to the courts for approval this coming Friday. So we'll keep an eye out for that to see what sort of deal was reached there. All right, that will do it for today. If you did make it through, thank you for listening. I always appreciate that. Of course, also appreciate those of you supporting the podcast on Patreon. If you want to learn more about doing that, you can find those details at patreon.com/Tesla Daily Podcast. I'd also encourage you to follow me on Twitter at Tesla Podcast. And if you have questions or feedback, you can send those to me at tesladailypodcast@gmail.com. Don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you tomorrow for the Tuesday, December 10th episode of Tesla Daily. Thank you.